Today's video is on the cardiovascular system, and we'll be looking at the vessels involved in that system. There are three major types of blood vessel involved in the cardiovascular system: arteries, veins, and capillaries. And we're going to look at arteries first. Now, arteries take blood away from the heart, and that blood is under high pressure. It has to get from the heart around the body to all the various organs via the aorta primarily. This vessel is composed of three major layers. This first layer is a thick layer of connective tissue, and this connective tissue contains collagen fibers. It has to be strong enough and flexible enough that it won't burst while the blood is being forced through it at a high pressure. The next layer is a layer of thick, smooth muscle. And in this smooth muscle, we have elastin fibers, giving it flexibility, allowing it to maintain the pressure within the artery. There are actually two layers of smooth muscle. We have the circular and the longitudinal muscle, and these work together to help keep that pressure high in the artery. And then there's an endothelium layer of cells. These are just the outer cells lining the vessel where interactions can occur. And generally these cells are the ones that get damaged when you have too high a pressure going through, or fatty plaques can build up on these cells. The last part is the lumen. So the lumen is narrow. This is basically the empty gap where the blood flows through. So if you think about like water running through a tap, if you turn the tap on, the water runs relatively slowly. But if you cover up half of the nozzle, the water shoots out really fast under high pressure. So when you force a liquid through a narrow tube or opening, it increases the pressure that liquid is under. So the lumen is very important in maintaining the pressure of our blood. Our next vessel is the veins. Now, blood is under low pressure in the veins. And again, there are the three layers, and these are the same basic three layers. So we have a layer of connective tissue, again with collagen fibers, but this layer is thin. Smooth muscle again with elastin to help flexibility, but again is thin. Because the pressure is low, we don't need those thick layers. But what we do need is to maintain the pressure. And so at this low pressure, the veins travel around the body. We're fighting against gravity quite a lot of the time. And so how does the blood flow? Where's the muscles, the skeletal muscles of the body, as they contract, they compress the veins, causing the pressure to increase slowly in the veins, pushing the blood along. So we need it to be thin and flexible, yet strong enough that it can be compressed. We have endothelial layer again, and our lumen. This time we have a wide lumen. So when it is fully compressed, the veins still allow blood to flow, but does not need to be narrow to maintain that. If it was too narrow, when the veins are compressed, it would cut the blood supply off. So having a wide lumen allows blood to continuously flow even when the vessels themselves are compressed. There's one extra structural feature of a vein, and that is it has valves. Due to this low pressure and inconsistent amount of compression from muscles, sometimes blood will slow down, but we don't want backflow. Backflow would be terrible. So a vein contains valves to help the blood stay moving in the correct direction towards our heart and fighting against gravity. It does have one drawback. Blood, when it tends to pool, does clot, and this can lead to problems. That's one reason for a problem called deep vein thrombosis, which is potentially life-threatening. The last type of vessel are the capillaries. The capillaries are very, very small, and they need to get the blood into all the different body tissues. They are just one single cell thick. So these are basically endothelial cells. And our actual lumen is only 10 micrometers in size. Now that's a large enough diameter to allow red blood cells to travel through, and white blood cells and the other components of the blood, and enable it to get in between cells inside tissues. It allows a short diffusion pathway to let oxygen diffuse out from our hemoglobin in our red blood cells, and to allow the carbon dioxide to diffuse into the blood. Some's taken up by red blood cells, some diffuses directly into the plasma. There's one other major feature of a capillary, and that's their pores. So these are literally gaps between the cells. This allows the plasma that contains all those lovely nutrients to seep out or leak out into the tissues, bathing the tissues in fluid and becoming tissue fluid, giving these nutrients to the tissues. And in turn, the tissues give all their waste products into the fluid. And slowly that fluid flows back in via the pores, back into the capillaries, taking the waste products away with it, adding the waste products into our blood, so it can then be filtered out by our kidneys, which is a whole another lesson. In actual fact, only 80% of the plasma that leaks and becomes tissue fluid returns into the capillaries. 20% of it actually goes into the lymphatic system, which is a very interesting system, which again is another whole thing. The second thing that uses the pores are the white blood cells. They're able to change shape, and so they can get out via the pores into the tissue. So that means they can access any tissue in the body and try and fight off any infection or potential problem, pathogen that gets into those tissues. So capillaries are very interesting and vital for the body's whole use of blood. So that brings us to the idea of the composition of blood. What is the blood actually made up of? Well, there's a few different parts of the blood. Plasma. So we mentioned this a minute ago. This is the liquid of the blood. This is the solvent, which is basically water with large amounts of nutrients, waste products, proteins, carbohydrates, and other soluble molecules inside. And it carries these things around the body, carries the blood cells around the body. So it's a vital part of our thing. Then we have a lovely red blood cell. Red blood cells' official name is erythrocytes. So these guys contain hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is able to carry oxygen. It collects the oxygen from the lungs, from the air, carries it around the body, and delivers it to the respiring tissues to use in cellular respiration. And it can also take away some of the carbon dioxide and help with dissolving the rest of the carbon dioxide within the plasma. Then the white blood cells we mentioned previously. Now, the official name of a white blood cell is a leukocyte. But there are actually two major types of white blood cell. We have our phagocytes. These are the non-specific white blood cells. And there are the lymphocytes. These are the specific white blood cells. These two types of white blood cell work together in defending our body and creating our immune system and creating antibodies and destroying pathogens. And that will be in a future video. It's a very interesting, very clever system. The last thing are the platelets. So these aren't really cells, they're kind of fragments of cells. And their major feature is in blood clotting. When you get damage to tissue, whether that's external damage coming through and causing capillaries or veins to be cut, like cut or graze, or damage from pressure or other things floating through the blood clots and forms a semi-solid clot that enables the tissue to block it, to stop pathogens from getting in, and to allow the tissue to repair itself. So it releases clotting factors, which then activates the platelets, then causes a cascade reaction. This cascade reaction causes a number of different proteins to be activated, which then activates the next one and then activates the next one. Kind of like dominoes. When you line them up, you knock the first one and it all goes down. The last step is a very interesting step. There's a protein called fibrinogen floating in your blood. Now this is a globular protein and it's soluble, but when activated it will be converted to fibrin, a fibrous protein which is insoluble, and the fibrin forms the mesh that forms the clot, and this captures proteins, red blood cells, white blood cells, and all the other things that make up our solid part of our clot, but allows the plasma to go through. That's why it's semi-solid, except when it's exposed to air. When it's exposed to air, and like a cut, it starts to dry up because the water content of the plasma evaporates, and eventually it forms a solid seal, which we call a scab. And under that scab, it protects it, stops the pathogens from getting in, and allows the tissue to repair itself. Quite often why scabs are quite itchy, because underneath there, the tissue is re-knitting itself back together. New cells are being made to seal up the damage. So you should never pick off your scabs, because that would just reopen the wound again, and it is not useful. It can also cause scarring. So to review what we covered in this video, we have done the different structure of the blood vessels. That's the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. And then the composition of blood: red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, and platelets. So that's the end of this video. If you have any questions or comments, please add them to the comments below. And next time we will be looking at the cardiac cycle itself and how the heart actually works in pumping the blood around the body.